Welcome to Saxon Math Course 3, Lesson 13, Adding and Subtracting Fractions and Mixed Numbers. Our objectives for today: after this lesson you should be able to add and subtract fractions and mixed numbers with and without common denominators, represent fraction addition and subtraction on a number line, add and subtract fractions and mixed numbers to solve word problems. Some review first. Remember this chart that shows all our decimal place values and how we work from right to left by multiplying by 10 each time. Anytime you see a decimal point in a number, that means the word and, which is important to remember. Decimals and fractions are read the same way, so if you have 3/10 and 3/10, you say them the same way, 3/10 and 3/10. Changing fractions to decimals, we do that by dividing the numerator by the denominator. Changing decimals to percents, we move that decimal 2 places to the right. And changing percents to decimals, we move the decimal 2 places to the left. So let's talk about adding and subtracting fractions with common denominators first, because you've been doing this for a while now and you already know how to do it. So all you need to do is add or subtract the numerators and keep the denominator the same. So an example of that would be something like, let's do 7/15 plus, let's do 4/15. Let me erase that. 7/15 plus 4/15 equals, we just keep the same denominator and we add our top numerator and we're left with 11/15 at the end. Adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. First though, we have to change the fractions into equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. Then we can add or subtract the fractions. So an example of that would be if we had, say, 2/3 minus 3/4. We would need to change those first. So our common denominator that we want to use the smallest common denominator we can find. So I know both of those numbers go into 12, so let's change them both to 12s. So to change those, we would do 2/3 times something over something equals something over 12. It's times 4, so we do 4 on top and bottom. That's 8/12. Then we do the same thing with 3/4. I know that's going to be 3/3. So that one's going to be 9/12. So remember, I had 3/4 or 2/3 minus 3/4, so we're actually going to have a negative answer here, which is fine. So that was 8/12 for 2/3 and 9/12 for 3/4, and now I just keep the same bottom number, same denominator. 8 minus 9 is -1, so that'd be -1/12. Adding and subtracting mixed numbers, we're going to treat them kind of like two different addition and subtraction problems. So first, we're going to add or subtract the whole numbers and then do the same to the fractions. And you might need to regroup like you do with a regular addition or subtraction problem. I'll show you an example of both. So let's do our first example. We'll do 7 1/3 minus 1.5. So before I subtract my whole numbers, I look at my fractions And I know I need to change these so that they're the same denominator. So the smallest number I know both 3 and 2 go into is 6. So I want to change both of those fractions so they have a 6 on the bottom. So 1/3 times 2 over 2 is going to give me a 6 as my denominator. And it's going to be 2/6. And then 1/2, it would be times 3 over 3, is going to give me 3/6. So I'm going to erase my original fractions, and I am going to put in my equivalent fractions. Now I am not going to be able to do 2/6 minus 3/6, so I need to borrow like I normally would in any subtraction problem. I'm going to borrow from the 7, make it a 6, but now instead of adding 10, I add whatever my denominator is. So in this case, my denominator is 6, so I'm going to add 6 to the numerator. 6 plus 2 is 8. And now I can subtract. So 8 minus 3 is 5, and I keep the same denominator. And then 6 minus 1 is also 5. So my answer would be 5 and 5/6. Now let's do an addition example. So say we have 3.5 plus 1 2/3. So same thing here. We're going to change our fractions so they have a common denominator. Again, it's 2 and 3, so I know it's going to be 6. And I already know that 1/2 from my previous problem. I already know 1/2 is 3/6. And then I'll just do 2/3 times 2 over 2 to get my 6 on the denominator. So that one's going to be 4/6. So I'm going to erase my 2/3 and put a 4/6 there. And now I can add. So I actually end up with 7/6, and 3 plus 1 is 4. But now I can't leave 7/6 like that. So I'm going to take out an equivalent fraction for 1. So I'll do it up here at the top. I need to take out one whole that has the same denominator as my fraction in my mixed number. So I need to take away 6/6. It's like when you're adding, like if I were doing 45 plus 27, and I'm adding 7 plus 5, it's 12, but I can't write 12 on the bottom. I have to leave a 2 and take a 1 whole away and add it to the next place value. So it's the same thing we're doing here. So 7/6 minus 6/6 would be 1/6. So now my fraction is actually 1/6, and I carried that 1 whole over here, and that becomes 5. So that would be 5 1/6. Always, this is going to be a reminder that you get all the time. Now that we're using fractions for a lot of stuff and you know how to reduce, anytime we're working with fractions, you always are going to try to reduce your fraction answers. Every time. You might not always be able to reduce because they might already be reduced, but you always look to reduce your answers. That's all for this lesson. Make sure you do your practice problems, post any questions, and we'll talk about them in class. We'll see you in lesson 14.